I'm Tom Morello, and you're listening to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour.
Stand up, you've been sitting way too long.
Welcome to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour. My name is Steve Scrovan, along with my co-host David Feldman. Hello, David.
Good morning.
Hannah is still out. She'll be back soon, but we have the man of the hour, Ralph Nader. Hello, Ralph.
Hello, everybody.
Today, we are going to start off on a positive note as we turn our attention to the mess that is America. And when I say mess, I literally mean mess. I'm talking about literal trash and one man who is trying to clean it up. Jon Merryman is an ordinary citizen from Baltimore County, Maryland, a retired software engineer who couldn't stand the trash, especially old tires, being dumped in his neighborhood. He took it upon himself to clean it all up. This has become his obsession, and now he's expanded his campaign across America. So far, he's cleaned up trash in over 2,000 counties across the United States, shoving it into 30-gallon bags or rolling 25 to 35-pound tires up and out of the ditches and ravines and streams where they were illegally dumped. We speak to a lot of journalists and advocates on the program, but we also love to highlight citizen action, and Jon Merryman is a perfect and worthy example of the power of one person to make change. In the second half of the program, Ralph lets the kids play. David and I will be interviewing friend of the show, Robert Weissman, co-president of Public Citizen, which at last count has 17 separate lawsuits against the Trump administration. He'll talk about those and also about the big budget reconciliation bill just passed in Congress and signed by President Trump last week that is the largest upward transfer of wealth in the history of the United States. Public Citizen put out a report on this entitled Trading Life for Death. They argue that the current reconciliation bill would fund record-high spending for the Pentagon and mass deportations, and they do that by cutting essential spending on Medicaid and food stamps, leaving millions of Americans vulnerable to hunger and sickness. As always, somewhere in the middle, we'll check in with our indomitable corporate crime reporter, Russell Mokhiber. But first, let's hear from an ordinary citizen who has taken it upon himself to clean up America. David?
Jon Merryman was a software designer at Lockheed Martin who, after retiring, found his true calling, cleaning up trash in every county in America. Welcome to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour, Jon Merryman.
Thank you.
Welcome indeed, John. I got to tell our listeners that this is a first in a series of programs we're going to have on people who are actually doing things. You know, we've had great authors and great policy recommenders and civic leaders trying to straighten out Congress and other things. But we now are going to have a series of people really doing things. And what caught my attention, John, was, as you might expect, a major Washington Post article with the headline, Retired Man Takes on Nemesis, Cleans Up 15,000 Discarded Tires. Quote, they ticked me off more than anything, end quote, Jon Merryman said about illegally dumped tires. He has a goal of cleaning up trash in every county in America, with a network, of course, end quote. And then to show listeners that this is no ivory tower effort. The article continues, quote, soaked in dark, stagnant water and sweat, Jon Merryman stood at the bottom of a Maryland ravine choked with poison ivy, trash, and his arch nemesis, illegally discarded tires. A swarm of mosquitoes buzzed around his head, but just like the occasional rat, snake, or hornet's nest he's uncovered over the years, he seems unfazed by the bloodsuckers. Only tires truly grate his soul. Quote, for some reason they tick me off more than anything, end quote, he said, wiping his brow and standing near Greenbelt Park in Prince George's County. Quote, I definitely hate tires, end quote. Well, why don't you tell our listeners how big a problem this is in terms of how many of these illegally discarded tires are thrown into ravines and elsewhere every year before we get into exactly what you're doing?
When I first started looking at the environment next to my place of work, one of the things I did uncover was tires, and they were definitely there from the 20s, the 30s, and the 40s. They've been there for decades. And then just after a while, the soil and the erosion just covers them up, and you just discover them and you realize this has been going on forever. As far as numbers, I have no idea how many are out there. I know anytime I see one, I'm going to take care of it if I'm physically able to. But they're everywhere, and it's a problem. States have started to try to address the problem, it seems, with programs where when you get tires exchanged at a tire dealership, you pay a $4 deposit. Sometimes they're more than that. I think Maryland just increased the amount. But now people are taking advantage of that system and they're pocketing some of that money, I think, and dumping the tires anyway. So the tires aren't making it to their final destination, which is hopefully recycling. It still seems to be an ongoing problem. And every time I see them, I bring them to the nearest road. I call the county highways department or the state highways department, and they happily take them away. And hopefully they're being disposed of properly at that point.
Before we get how you have taken over 15,000 tires up ravines and where you put them, the Federal Highway Administration estimates that 280 million tires are discarded by Americans yearly, and just 30 million of them are reused or retreaded. That leaves 250 million that need to be managed. And the Federal Highway Administration estimates that 2 billion to 3 billion have accumulated in stockpiles or illegal dumps over the years as a result. Give us an idea of how you actually get one tire after another up the ravine, and where do you put it?
Well, the car tires are pretty easy. As long as they're not on the rim and full of mud and water, they're 25 pounders, and I can just walk with them 2 at a time, carry them from wherever I need to. Sometimes getting them out of the predicament they're in the mud, underneath the sand and gravel in a stream bank takes some work. You need to use shovels and pry bars and whatever you need to use. Sometimes the challenge is getting them to the nearest road. Sometimes they're in pretty remote areas, and sometimes it takes a couple days just to march them back and forth, making lots of trips back and forth. Up the hill, it can be challenging, especially when they get larger. In the story in the Washington Post, he had a picture of me. I built a tire ladder or tire staircase out of the tractor trailer tires because they're so big. And that gives me a chance to rest between every time I'm lifting the tire. I can rest as often as I want. I can take a break. If you're trying to just move the tire up the hill, like rolling it up the hill, the moment I lose my footing, there goes the tire back down the hill, usually further away than the first time I picked it up. And so I've gotten into flipping them instead of trying to roll them up the hill. But it's a challenge. It's a workout, but I'm happy to do it. I'm happy to explore the limits of what one person can achieve without special tools. I try to do this with just manual tools. I don't use winches and vehicles to pull things. I just do it myself. I do the best I can. I get them up to the roadside and I keep them on the shoulder of the road. And depending on what road it is, if it's a county maintained road, the county's highways department will come pick them up. And if it's state road, then
now what do they do with it? Is there any kind of organized recycling in this country of discarded tires?
So
what do they do with it when they pick it up?
Experience throughout the country, every state's different. Our 50-state experiment, every state has the right of addressing issues how they want. When I went to the event in Philadelphia, where I met Jason, the author of the Washington Post article, they had about 4,000 tires that needed to come out of that park. And then my friend Scott and I, after the event, after we got all the tires out of there with, the hundreds or 200 people that were there with us, we drove down towards Delaware and we passed right by an incinerator plant. And I found out when the article came out, I found out that was the destination of all these tires we pulled out. They were just being incinerated, because tires are high BTU and it creates energy. But it's just passing the problem, somewhere else. It's putting it in the air. It's going into the water. It's invisible at that point. But at least, we don't have to look at the tires anymore. So not every place has a great solution. I know some places repurpose tires, shred them into rubber crumb. They have products like rubber mulch. I don't know what's good about that. It just sounds like it's terrible. Just putting the materials directly into the ground and all that stuff is going to leach out.
So there are more and more uses being found for discarded tires.
Yeah, asphalt, concrete mixes, playgrounds, but it's still, I think it feels like it's just kicking the can down the road. Or eventually that playground surface needs to come out. And then what do you do with it? I've seen them used for the bases of highway traffic barrels, the orange and white barrels. They'll cut the sidewall out of a tractor trailer tire and use that for the base. That seems like a good temporary solution, but eventually that thing needs to be recycled too. Again, I don't think there's enough iterations of repurposing these products that are out there that's not sustainable to me, it seems.
Well, what brings to mind is, what are the big tire companies doing on this? Have they contacted you? Are they interested in having efforts like you spread all over the country? Or is it an attitude of out of sight, out of mind for these corporations?
I'm a small fish in a big sea, and none of these big companies have contacted me. However, I've worked with some of the politicians here in Maryland. I know they've passed some recent laws about producer responsibility. I haven't seen that come to fruition and see what that means as far as tires or even other products like plastic bottles and cans and things like that. But I know there are some laws coming online in some of the bluer states. We've had a ban on foam products, for example. I kind of helped by providing them with all the pictures of all the foam products choking our streams. That helped create those laws. They use my photos a lot for those kinds of things too.
As you know, this is more than a solid waste problem. We're talking with Jon Merryman, who's a one-man picker-upper of discarded tires in ditches and ravines. There was once an arsonist who started a fire in an area piled high with discarded tires, and it took 9 months to put it out. So are these happening around the country, these fires?
It's kind of like a peat bog fire. I mean, it's the same kind of chemistry involved, where some of these things are just impossible to put out once they get started. I know there was a tire dump in Western Maryland. Some guy was started in a business of going around and collecting them. And then by the time he collected, 200,000 tires, went bankrupt, didn't know what to do, just kind of walked away from it all. And then, the rest of us, the taxpayers, are left with dealing with the problem. And it seems like that's been, for this entire industry, it's been the way it's been going all along for decades. Now things are starting to change, and I'm hoping it gets better, but I don't know exactly where this is all going.
Are you learning anything from other countries who are doing it better, either by preventing the dumping or recycling? Anything we can learn from other countries?
I'm not aware of things. My focus has been on finding them and demonstrating that it is a problem, and then working with my local politicians. Haven't really pushed this nationally myself. I feel like I'm not well versed enough in the industry to understand all the issues. I haven't researched it all, but I am here to let them know that yes, we still have a problem. Just because you don't see them because they're at the bottom of they're in the creek, they're under the mud in the river, they're out there, and I'm pulling them out and showing it to them and making sure they understand it's a problem. So that's been my focus, really.
Listeners, in most states, tire dumping is a misdemeanor. It's punishable with a fine and jail time, but enforcement is, as you might expect, very minimal.
Well, I've actually seen people in the act of dumping tires, and the worst anybody has received for punishment has been go back and clean them up. The police have told them to go back and clean them up, and they're just going to dump it somewhere else later on when no one's looking. Some other folks have gotten community service, but never it's been fines or jail time for these people, even when they're caught in the act, at least in my experience.
Is anybody learning from the economic incentive to pick up bottles and recycle them? You get so much per bottle in communities around the country.
Maryland has been close to passing it. We had two committees to get the vote through this year, got through one, and the second one didn't even bring it up for a vote. And that's been the third time in the last 10 years that we've talked about a deposit refund scheme for bottles and cans here in Maryland. So hopefully next year, they're being optimistic that next year is going to be the year that it gets done. But it's been proven to work in other states that have it. Oregon, I had to cleanups in every county in two side-by-side states, Vermont, New Hampshire. Vermont has that kind of a program. New Hampshire doesn't. And when I went through every county in Vermont looking for trash to fill a bag, trying to find bottles and cans was almost impossible. They're all picked up. Everybody's cashing them in and turning them in. The only place I was able to find bottles and cans in Vermont was right at the state line with New Hampshire.
And are you getting more publicity on national TV or local TV or newspapers around the country?
I haven't been until this most recent article with the Washington Post. Yeah, that kind of went national. And I'm getting emails from strangers and how I've encouraged them to go out and do things now. It's kind of interesting to see how it's exploded recently, including you.
You've been at this how many years before you got a major newspaper article? How many years?
I would say it started in 2008, 2009, and not necessarily with tires, but I've just continuously found tires over the years. I started with cleanups with a group called Patapsco Heritage Greenway, and they had organized 3-hour cleanups. My first nemesis was a shopping cart, was buried in the gravel and sand in a dry creek bed. And it's in the middle of nowhere. It's like, how in the world does this shopping cart get here? And those kinds of things just irk me to no end. It's like, why is it here? I'm going to take care of it. And I just spent my entire 3 hours of the cleanup trying to get that thing out of there. Didn't get it done, went back later and got it done. But after a while, after about 5 years of that, doing organized cleanups with groups like that, I challenged myself in 2013 to clean up 1,000 tires. I knew they were out there because I'd seen them all over the place. And I wanted to get 1,000 tires by the end of the year. And by St. Patrick's Day, I'd already accomplished that goal. There were so many tires out there. It was nuts.
Are the well-known environmental groups picking up on this at all? Have they contacted you? They have networks around the country.
So I have a network through Facebook. There's a group called People Against Litter. It's a conglomeration of all kinds of cleanup groups from all over the country, and even some other folks from around the world, but mostly in the U.S. And we share ideas, we share success stories, frustrations with dealing with the local government, dealing with local businesses, all those things. We share ideas. I've been trying to, as I travel around the country, I'm trying to visit and, learn from them, maybe teach them a few things and kind of network with them and, make them feel that we're not in this by ourselves. We're not alone. There's more of us out there than we realize. And it's just nice to meet them face to face and go out and get dirty.
One would think from a PR point of view that the big tire companies should fund a network of citizens who are volunteering like you to clean up their act. I mean, in Germany, they have laws that require the auto companies to recycle a lot of their used automobiles. Have you thought about contacting them at all?
So here in the U.S., I've always had not an issue, but we have 50 states, and each state seems to have its own idea of what's the right way to go about this. We don't have like a national policy because it seems like national politicians are hesitant to create rules for all 50 states. It feels too curmudgeonly for them to push things onto states and tell them they must do this, they must do that. Other countries can do that. They said when France wants to do something, it's nationwide. When Germany wants to do something, it's nationwide. We have, for better or worse, we allow our states to go about doing things the way they think best. And in a lot of ways, it's limiting our progress towards solutions in some ways.
Well, this is quite a remarkable effort by you. I mean, you're now about 62 years old. You're retired. Not many people do this. What drives you?
I often describe it as channeling my anger. I don't come across that way when I talk to people about the problem, but inside, I'm furious. I mean, that this even exists, that it's out there in the first place. And I just decided, I can just be PO'd about it all the time, or I can do something about it. So I have a friend in high school who was a state champion shot putter. And the way I saw him channel his rage into being the state champion, he's not a big guy, but you can accomplish a lot if you're able to harness that energy. And that's the way I am about it. If I see something, I'm taking care of it. If I see one tire, I go and check it out. There's 50 more. I'm going to be late for work that day.
Well, the psychologists call this emotional intelligence, Jon. Emotional intelligence. You can know a lot in your head about what needs to be done, but it's fire in the belly that really gets people moving, breaking their routine, and standing tall.
That saying I've heard, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And that's true for anything in life. You just got to take it in chunks. You want to achieve a big goal, you break it down into smaller goals and just get all those done. And the next thing you know, you're there. That's what I keep doing.
Well, Steve?
Jon, what kind of support do you get from your family about this particular avocation? What's that done with your relationships with family and friends?
So my wife, the angel that she is, she puts up with a lot. I've gone through periods of time where I was collecting all the scrap metal I was finding out there in the woods, in the park, along the sides of the road. And I filled my driveway with scrap metal. When it got to be a truckload, I would rent a rental truck, take it in, cash it in for the scrap value, and turn that money over to my kids' robotics team. So it became I'm trying to do good things with the bad. I'm trying to turn it into make lemonade out of lemons. She's been very patient with me. She's understanding. I think as time goes on, it's been easier for her to stop rolling her eyes and just understand it as it's actually turning out to be a pretty good thing, a positive thing. And so
is she ever out there with you? Does she go on the trips?
No. She's still working. She's younger than me, so she's still got a real job, a paying job.
How about your children?
So I started this when my kids were probably teenagers. They were busy with activities. My son was a national class swimmer. My daughter was a national champion storyteller. They had a lot of activities going on. I didn't want to impose upon their schedules and bend over backwards to help them with their activities. So I didn't really push to have them included. But my son did help me when he was going for an internship from college from Georgia over to California. We did a cross-country drive. And he helped me with the cleanups. That's the first time I did long distance cleanups where we were stopping in every state and doing a cleanup and just kind of documenting that and posting that online on social media.
You're really amazing. David? What do you want to ask Jon Merryman?
Well, I really appreciate how you talked about harnessing your rage. I don't think any of our listeners know what it's like not to be enraged. And I think this show helps listeners harness the rage. We all have obsessions. Humans obsess on things. You're obsessing on collecting 1,000 tires. Other people waste their obsession on golf. Or as Ralph would say, or birding.
I find lots of golf balls out there too.
How do we obsess on the right things? I would assume you fall asleep at night counting tires that you've rounded up. How do we teach people to obsess on the right things?
That's a great question. I mean, there's so many things to worry about in life. And to be honest, I've been blessed to have a good paying job, supportive family. I'm not worried about where my next meal is coming from. So I've always been the kind of person who's kind of gone the other way from whatever's popular. You know, everybody in retirement wants to, I do travel, but I'm cleaning up trash while I do it. I'm combining activities. Not interested in golf. I played one of the worst days of golf in my life on one of the most beautiful golf courses in the world in Hawaii and decided I'm done with this. I'm moving on. There's so many things to be done in the world that need doing. We all need exercise. Why pay a gym to do that when you can go out and do it for free and actually make a difference in the world as well? So
here's another elaboration of his obsession. He took a vacation once with his wife to South Korea, and he got to Jeju Island. He started picking up trash all over the place. He's going to Alaska around Labor Day. What are you going to do in Alaska?
So the first week I'll be with my son and his girlfriend visiting some national parks. I'm trying to clean up in every county in the U.S., but I'm also trying to clean up in all the national park units as well. Just attempting just to fill a bag, a 30-gallon bag. Otherwise, I'll just, if I'm doing a hike, I'll just pick up every bit of trash I see all on the trail, and whatever it is, bring it back.
Well, you're welcome to stay in my apartment in New York anytime. Bring a trash bag.
Oh, well, you should see my personal space is not very organized or clean necessarily, but yeah, the environment, nature is innocent. It really doesn't deserve what we've given it. And I feel like someone's got to step up, got to undo what we've done.
On that note, any last minute urgings of people who might want to pick up your hobby and pull a few tires once in a while from their local ravine?
I would just encourage them to look and see what's out there. There's certain places that people dump. You see truckers parked on the side of the road because there's not enough room in the rest areas for them. After COVID, the amount of trucks on the road really increased. Just take a look behind the guardrails there. You'd be surprised at what you see. If you're going down a neighborhood road and there's a dead end road that goes into the woods, I guarantee you there's going to be something back in there, a mattress, some tires. Start looking and being aware of your surroundings. And I guarantee at least a handful of those folks will decide to do something about it once you know it's there.
Have you started a website?
I have a Facebook page for my mascot. This is a plastic shark that I found on one of my cleanups. I make it look like he's cleaning up and I'm helping him, just trying to get kids interested in, the whole idea of taking care of our environment. If you go to #SharkRanger on Facebook or Instagram, you can find his page and see all the cleanups.
We've been talking with Jon Merryman, who is really one of a kind. There's no other way to describe it. And all the best to you, and I hope that you multiply your efforts with thousands of other people, because it is a numbers game to keep up with the number of tires thrown into ditches and ravines and other places around the country. Thank you very much, Jon.
It really is. Thank you, sir.
We've been speaking with citizen extraordinaire Jon Merryman. We will link to his work at ralphnaderradiohour.com. We're going to take a short break, but when we come back, Robert Weissman, co-president of Public Citizen, joins us to talk about the big bogus bill that just passed by Congress and signed by President Trump and what is left to be done about it. But first, let's check in with our corporate crime reporter, Russell Mokhiber.
From the National Press Building in Washington, D.C., this is your Corporate Crime Reporter Morning Minute for Friday, July 11, 2025. I'm Russell Mokhiber. The volume of federal employees who are disclosing wrongdoing is surging, as are the numbers who report retaliation for making such disclosures. That's according to the latest figures from the U.S. Office of Special Counsel. At the same time, the Trump White House has removed the leaders of entities such as OSC, the Merit Systems Protection Board, and agency inspectors general compromising their effectiveness. Despite widespread rhetoric about government efficiency, the very people who can best identify problems are increasingly ignored, said peer executive director Tim Whitehouse. This is akin to turning off all the smoke alarms in the name of fire safety, he said. For the Corporate Crime Reporter, I'm Russell Mokhiber.
Thank you, Russell. Welcome back to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour. I'm Steve Scrovan, along with David Feldman and Ralph. Our next guest argues that the spending bill just passed in Congress and signed by the president trades life for death. David?
Robert Weissman is a staunch public interest advocate and activist, as well as an expert on a wide variety of issues, ranging from corporate accountability and government transparency to trade and globalization, to economic and regulatory policy. As the co-president of Public Citizen, he has spearheaded the effort to loosen the chokehold corporations and the wealthy have over our democracy. Welcome back to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour, Robert Weissman.
Great to be with you guys.
Hi, Rob. Before we got on the air, you were telling us you just came from Capitol Hill where you were testifying for the Senate Health Committee. And tell us how that went.
Well, it was an interesting morning. The topic of the hearing was ostensibly about cybersecurity and healthcare, which is a very important issue. We can talk about it if you want. There's a lot of layers of how large corporations are making the problem much worse, as well as the chaos inside the Trump administration. But Bernie Sanders, who's the ranking member, like the one with the most seniority on that committee on the Democratic side, said that what the Republicans want to do is just sort of move forward as if reconciliation, that tax and budget bill that just cut healthcare coverage for 17 million Americans, as if that never happened. And Bernie said, we're not going to go along with that. So he asked me and another witness, Professor Alison Galvani from Yale University, to testify, not focusing on cybersecurity, although I said a few words, but focusing on the impact of the reconciliation bill and the case for Medicare for all.
And what was the Republican response to Bernie bringing that up?
Well, Senator Cassidy, who's the chair of the committee, was unhappy to have the topic diverted from the named topic of the hearing on cybersecurity. So there were a few sparks that way. When I was testifying, he held his gavel up as I was speaking, making it clear that the second that my 5 minutes were up, the gavel was going to come down and I was going to be shut off. So I got in under the wire.
Well, let's talk about what you talked about. What did you tell him that made him want to cut you off?
Well, we talked about what the reconciliation bill is going to do, and it's so horrible. The healthcare thing is central, but there are really just manifold, horrific elements of this bill. The short version of what this bill is, and it really misses tons of what it does, is a measure to slash healthcare for 17 million Americans in order to partially pay for tax cuts for the rich and large corporations. So we talked especially about what does it mean that 17 million people are going to lose their health care? Well, we know with a certainty what it means. It means that people are not going to get treatment that they need, that they're going to skip preventative services they should get, that they're going to get sick and sicker than they should be and suffer needlessly, that when they do go get the health care that they need, they're going to go late but pay more because the out-of-pocket cost for individuals is dramatically more, that many will just let conditions linger, and that lots of people will die. And the best estimates are that the loss of insurance and measures in this bill will cost 40,000 lives every year, not once, every year. And an additional 10,000, being a total of 50,000, will die from other changes made in the bill about staffing standards and nursing homes. So that's the annual toll. And that was the focus. But then what I also argued is the reason to do this, some of them are just cruel and some of them hate government health care. But the main thing was they were trying to get the savings to pay for the tax cuts. So they save $1 trillion over a 10-year period through these measures. But save in quotes, because it's not a real savings. Government may save some money, not as much as they say, but will save money on the outlay for Medicaid. But that's not a societal savings. That's just shifting the cost to the people who are going to have to suffer with untreated conditions and pay out of pocket. That's a fake savings. By contrast, there are real savings that are available in the healthcare sector, large savings that are available in the healthcare sector. If we dealt with the problem of big pharma price gouging, and just brought down the price of drugs to what the VA, the Veterans Administration, already pays. Forget what they pay in Canada or France. Just that, a 40% price reduction, we'd save $200 billion a year. So $2 trillion over 10 years, twice as much as the slashing of Medicaid and healthcare coverage is going to achieve. If we eliminated privatized Medicare, which is also called Medicare Advantage, which has all kinds of administrative waste and misbilling and fraud associated with it, we save $100 billion a year. So again, $1 trillion over 10 years, the same amount as what was purportedly saved by cutting healthcare for people. The difference is those are real savings. They're real actual dollar savings because we're eliminating inefficiency, we're eliminating waste, we're eliminating fraud. And the even more important difference is instead of stripping people of healthcare, we're expanding access to healthcare and improving quality care. Because Medicare, for example, delivers a much higher quality product for consumers, for patients, than does Medicare Advantage, privatized Medicare. So that was the main gist. And I close, and my colleague, Dr. Galvani, talked about this more. We could save even more than I just suggested if we move to a Medicare for all system by eliminating all the waste that's in the billing process of our system. About like a quarter of all we spend on healthcare is involved in billing. You can get rid of most of that and save about $700 billion a year. And of course, moving to Medicare for all. And of course, again, reducing waste and expanding coverage rather than achieving fake savings and stripping coverage.
Now, Public Citizen put out a report in late May called Trading Life for Death, making the point that a lot of this spending that you're talking about, a lot of these cuts are going to military and for mass deportations at the expense of the social safety net. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, so along with the $4 trillion or more in tax cuts that primarily are going to benefit the rich and corporations, there were some other really major elements in the bill. Two of them were more spending for the Pentagon, $150 billion over 2 years, and for mass deportation, about $170 billion. So the Pentagon already has a $900 billion annual budget, by far the most wasteful and inefficient agency in the government, can't complete an audit, replete with fraud. Half the money goes to Pentagon contractors who rip us off right and left, forgetting what it is that they're actually producing. They just got an extra $150 billion. $25 billion of that is specifically allocated for the so-called Golden Dome, which is intended to be the U.S. version of the famous Israeli Iron Dome, called a Golden Dome because they know Trump likes gold.
Yeah.
So $25 billion to start this. This is like Star Wars, for those who are old enough to remember when there were the Reagan Star Wars program. It's a missile defense system. It's not an actual dome, even though it conveys that with the image. And it's supposed to stop ballistic missile threats against the United States. Turns out, basically, from a physics perspective, impossible to achieve that objective. And if we could, it would make the world less safe because it would just encourage any rival country to figure out ways around it, engage in their own kind of arms race. This is old history that we're now reliving. So $25 billion is going to go to the big tech companies to work on this Golden Dome system. That's a lot of money, but it's a down payment on what would at minimum be hundreds of billions of dollars and probably trillions of dollars if they tried to actually deploy a system at scale. The bill also has $170 billion for ICE and mass deportations. It's going to involve this massive scale up of hiring by ICE to rip people off the streets, and this huge construction project that's going to benefit private prison contractors to create detention centers to house people. So the kind of thing we're seeing with the so-called alligator Alcatraz in Florida can become much more prevalent with all this money flowing through. And as bad and terrible as the scenes have been in Los Angeles, but around the country, of people being abducted, kidnapped effectively by masked agents, that is going to become much, much more prevalent with all this extra money. So our report focused on these two spends in the reconciliation bill and compared that to the taking away of healthcare. And this sort of breaks down on a state-by-state basis. Hey, the amount of money that proportionally is going to go to the Pentagon from Missouri, here's how many people we could keep on Medicaid.
There's some, I've got it in front of me here. It says, like, for instance, in Arizona's 5th District, taxpayer funds directed to Trump's Golden Dome could instead provide Medicaid to 7,529 people. Same thing in Kentucky, in their 4th District. Trump's Golden Dome could instead go to 6,228 people for Medicaid. So it's thousands and tens of thousands of people.
Yeah, it's a cool report because it breaks it down. That way you can, wherever you live, we've got the data for you. What's interesting about this, we do ongoing work to try to cut back Pentagon spending for all the obvious reasons. And we always talk about the trade-offs, like this money that's going to the Pentagon, instead it could go for this or that better purpose. And that's true, but it's a little bit theoretically true because it's not actually taking money. The next $1 billion for the Pentagon doesn't actually come from education, say. In this bill, it's direct. The way the House Republicans worked the bill, they had to pay for the extra money, pay in quotes, for the extra money they were going to give to the Pentagon and for immigration, mass deportation. So they directly took money from Medicaid and put it in to the Pentagon in this bill. It's not sort of, well, there's generally trade-offs. It was a specific cut over here to pay for the extra expenditure over there. So specifically taking from healthcare and also from food assistance, from SNAP benefits, to pay for the increased spending on the Pentagon and mass deportation.
That's an important point because we have a lot of listeners who are into modern monetary theory who are always pointing out to us in the comments that the federal government, it's not a one-for-one, dollar-for-dollar thing because the federal government can print money. It's that kind of the way the currency system works. But at the state level, it is sort of dollar for dollar. And what you're saying is they are literally taking that money out of Medicaid to pay for the Golden Dome.
Yeah, I mean, two things are true. I mean, in this deal, it was direct. It's also, it may be the biggest adherents of modern monetary theory in the US Congress are the congressional Republicans, because this is also a massive deficit increasing bill. So they obviously don't think the deficit is any issue whatsoever because they've just planned to increase it by $3 or $4 trillion.
Yeah.
I notice there's this thing called rescissions where they take back money already allocated. I don't know if that's constitutional, and that they're reversing a lot of the provisions inside Joe Biden's Inflation Reduction Act. If the Democrats take back the House and the Senate next year, can any of this be reversed?
Well, there's two different parts to what you said. So what they're doing in rescission is a technical term in Washington, and this bill is not a rescission in that sense, but it is undoing the provisions of the Inflation Reduction Act. And I didn't mention this part. There, the biggest chunk is support for renewable energy. So hundreds of billions of dollars in tax credits and other programs to support the build out of renewable energy and avert the climate catastrophe. Like the Inflation Reduction Act is the most important climate related bill in American history, probably in world history. They're now undoing that. They're taking away all those subsidies. So that is permissible. Current Congresses are never bound by what prior Congresses did, nor could this Congress bind a future Congress. So a future Congress could undo everything that's in this reconciliation bill and do some better things. And hopefully they will. Now, is that going to happen in 2026? No, it's not. I mean, you'd have to have, a 2/3 majority in both houses to override a veto from Trump. But it could happen after the 2028 election. I think undoing this reconciliation package is a virtual certainty if the Democrats control Congress and the presidency again, hopefully all of it. So that's available. Additionally, rescission is a specific term in Washington, which involves where the executive refuses to spend money that was appropriated, where the president refuses to spend money that was appropriated by Congress. They can go to Congress and say, hey, we don't want to spend this money that you told us to spend. Pass a bill that enables us to do that. That's called rescission. And what's special about rescission as compared to just the regular appropriations deal or any other law is that it passes by majority vote in the Senate with no filibuster. So as it happens, and of course, this administration led by Russ Vought, who I talked about in the Office of Management and Budget, is refusing to spend all kinds of money that's been appropriated, which is illegal.
This is for 2025.
This is in the current year as we're living and breathing right now. And they're trying out their first rescission package. So it's definitely illegal not to spend the money.
This is to lock in some of Elon Musk's cuts.
Yeah, if Congress votes on it, then that makes it legal. Congress can. This is a legitimate process, and so they've started and they want approval. They want a rescission package for cuts to foreign assistance and for public broadcasting, and that the House has already passed it, and the Senate has to move on it by a week from Friday, so July 18th. And it's a little up for grabs because there's supporters of some of these foreign assistance programs, and there's a lot of supporters, despite the long-term Republican crusade against public broadcasting, for public broadcasting, which is most important, really, in rural areas. So it's a very live issue as we speak, whether the Senate's going to vote for this rescission package. So that's really important both for those areas, which are really vital areas. The foreign assistance cuts on top of what's already happening would be just literally deadly. I mean, public broadcasting is, a backbone of a well-functioning democracy and a super important service in rural and remote areas. In addition to that, if they can do it once, it changes what the whole appropriations process is, because appropriations goes forward and it's negotiated between both parties because it has to overcome the 60 vote threshold in the Senate. But it makes a mockery of that whole process. If it takes 60 votes to get the appropriations bill passed and requires Democratic assent, but it can be undone without the possibility of a filibuster and by unilateral Republican action and the unilateral demands of the Trump administration. So this is a rescission request. Hopefully it's not too technical. It's a rescission request for $9 billion in these two important areas. But if it moves forward, it's going to really blow up the whole appropriations process.
So it's the opposite of a supplemental.
Yes.
Can you pass a supplemental in the Senate without a filibuster?
Yeah, a supplemental is just an extra appropriations bill, and it also subject to the filibuster.
It is subject to a filibuster.
Yeah.
But a rescission is not.
Correct, because the rescission is under this law called the Impoundment Act. And so it's specifically authorized by law.
And Russell Vogt, at least he's doing it through the proper channels, because he still believes, despite what the Supreme Court said, that the president has a line item veto, right?
He has no concern whatsoever for proper channels. This is a test to see if it's convenient for him to do it this way. If they do it this way, they're protected from legal challenges in courts, so there's some upside. But if it turns out to be too hard to get these things through, which hopefully is going to be the case, he's explicit that he intends to do it anyway. His theory is that he's got a legal right to do it without any congressional action. He talks about things called pocket rescissions, as well as you say the line, which is a different kind of a cousin to the line item veto. But he thinks the president has all power, which not so incidentally in this case means he has all power, because it's not as if Trump has any idea what he's doing.
Wasn't a public citizen that's responsible for challenging the line item veto?
As a matter of fact, it is.
Rob, talk a little bit about the private contractors who are benefiting from this, the Elon Musk, because that explains why these people are voting for this, I assume.
Well, the biggest piece is just a massive tax cut for rich people and corporations. So all corporations benefit, all rich people are going to disproportionately benefit. And that's the real driver. That if you can look at the Republicans and say, do they really stand for anything? Mostly no. They do stand for one thing. They stand for tax cuts for rich people and corporations. And they're delivering on that. That's always the priority. That's the main thing. As you go through what's in this bill, it's going to, apart from that, it will help some identifiable sectors, but it'll hurt some, including some that they purport to care about. So at the hearing that we were at this morning, testifying on the impacts of the tax and budget reconciliation bill on Medicaid and on healthcare, we talked quite a bit about rural hospitals. And one of the witnesses that the Republicans brought was the top administrator at a rural hospital in Ohio. And she was there to talk really about cybersecurity. She's saying it's hard. Rural hospitals, we're not a big hospital. We're not an insurance company. We don't have a lot of extra resources. In fact, half of all rural hospitals are losing money year over year, and hundreds have closed in the last 20 years. So we don't have extra money sitting around to do extra investments in cybersecurity. And of course, the conversation is okay, that's right. And these Medicaid cuts are going to be devastating for rural hospitals, which disproportionately rely on Medicaid patients and serve Medicaid patients. And she wasn't there to talk about that, so she wasn't super eager. But she said, yeah, if it plays out the way you're saying, it's going to be, we think we can stay open, but we'll have to cut whole areas of service. And, we're certainly not going to do things like invest more in cybersecurity. In the health sector, there are lots of enterprises that are going to be really badly hurt. Those are going to benefit, some that got really specific deals in the bill. Yeah, the private contractors doing the prison building are going to benefit from all this money for mass deportation and the creation of these mega detention centers. The Pentagon contractors are going to make out like crazy. And that includes now both the traditional Pentagon contractors like Lockheed and Boeing, but also the new AI and tech companies that are trying to get in on this stuff, companies with names like Palantir and Anduril, as well as Elon Musk's SpaceX, not as favorite a company as it was a few months ago, but still in the mix to help build this so-called Golden Dome. The oil and gas industry got some specific tax benefits that will give them about $18 billion extra over the next 10 years, since they're not doing well enough. So those are some of the particular sectors they're going to make out.
Now, I have to think, I don't know what you've done or paid attention to the polling, that this bill cannot be popular. And if I was a Democratic ad person, I would splice all these Republican congressmen singing YMCA in celebration of the bill with pictures of the results of the devastation that it puts on real people. What do you know about the popularity of this bill just among the populace?
Well, one problem we've had is that most people don't really know what's in it. They might have heard of the ridiculous name that Trump gave it, disinclined to repeat, but they didn't really know what was in it. People who did know what was in it or who heard what was in it predictably hate it. So the idea that you're doing, again, there are many horrible pieces in here, but the core element of doing tax cuts for rich people and corporations paid for by cutting healthcare for regular Americans, that sounds idiotic and evil to most Americans. And the polling shows that. And it is the case the Democrats are 100% committed to running on that in 2026, and probably the presidential will do it in 2028. The two kind of twists in this maybe are, one, some of the impacts will be delayed because some of these cuts to Medicaid and other harmful impacts are delayed intentionally until after 2026, so it won't impact the election. They have to be told about it, but they won't necessarily feel it. And also, I have a big worry. There's no question the Democrats are going to run super hard on this, as they should. The worry is, a couple of weeks ago, before this package was passed, it wasn't like healthcare in America was great. So we absolutely need to repeal what was just done, but we have to do more than just defend a profoundly flawed status quo. We have to talk about expanding healthcare eventually to cover everybody, but also taking on the big corporations by name. People understand that there's a rigged system. They understand that generally, and they understand that with healthcare. But if you don't name the health insurance companies as an enemy, as a barrier towards moving forward, you don't say United Health, you don't go after big pharma, which is probably the most despised health sector in the economy. People don't think you're serious. And partially that's because you're not. So, I'm hopeful the Dems are going to do not just campaign against this horror, but also say they're committing and pledging to do more. And the more is both expand coverage and go after the big healthcare companies that are destroying our healthcare system, profiteering off of it and blocking care.
Well, I'm sure Chuck Schumer will write a very strongly worded letter and maybe change the name he changed it to the act. You should change it to the unnatural act.
I really appreciate what you're saying, because you cannot win the midterms by promising Americans, we're going to bring you back to the halcyon days of 3 years ago, which gave rise, the same conditions that gave rise to Trump's return. We're going to bring you right back to where things were when you were ready for Trump.
Yeah, this is not any special insight, but in the bigger picture of things, people feel like things aren't right, and they're right. And Trump gives them an enemy, right? He's got someone to blame, and the entity to blame are immigrants, which, is cruel and stupid both, but has some explanatory power when he tells the story and his accolades. And if the Democrats don't name an enemy, like who's responsible for this, very hard to win the political debate.
Rob, so let's move to what happens next. What can be done? Aside from relying on the Democrats to reverse some of this, but, Public Citizen led the coalition for the No Kings rally, and you came out to LA, and I heard you tell a group of people that, even though it's bad, nothing is inevitable. And also Public Citizen is doing what it can inside the Beltway with, 17 lawsuits? First, let's talk about, in general, the lawsuits that you're doing, what the progress is on them. And then we can just expand that to what our listeners can look for and what they can do when called upon.
So we've filed 17 lawsuits against the administration. I think there are now a few hundred that have been filed by the litigating organizations, of which are just a few, and the state attorneys general, who have been very aggressive and effective. And, I would say overall, the litigation is a super important tool in slowing down what the administration is doing, focusing public attention, sometimes completely blocking what they're trying to do, other times changing what they're doing so they can't quite do as much or as fast or as exactly the same way they originally intended. We're not going to win all these cases, even though I think we should, both we, Public Citizen, and our colleagues. At the end of the day, we're dealing with a court system that in the first instance wants to believe what the government says is true. And I'll give some examples of that. So you think about whether there's a Trump appointee, but also an Obama appointee, a Bush appointee, Clinton appointee. They are inclined to believe what the government says, either way, either pointed from either party. And then we have to go in the context of jurisprudence that's been shaped by a very conservative Supreme Court, and some of these cases are now starting to make their way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. And it'd be foolish to think the court's going to be smiling on most of these cases. They're not. A lot of them aren't going to get there at all. But the ones that do, we're going to lose a lot. I think there's some lines that this court won't cross, but there are others where it looks pretty likely they're going to. We just got a terrible ruling yesterday, sort of on an administrative matter about whether a stay, like a hold, will remain in place from the Supreme Court. But they made clear in the course of rejecting it that they intend where they think the case is going to go. And this was a case challenging, this is not a public citizen case, but it's a case challenging the mass layoffs that the administration is trying to do. They call them RIFs, reductions in force, RIF. And those had been on hold on the grounds that they were illegal, that there's a process you've got to follow to either terminate people individually or to have massive reductions in force. Basically, you got to do studies and go through process, and sometimes you need congressional authorization. None of that happened. But the Supreme Court said, okay, we're removing that hold on it, that stay. And we're doing so because we think at the end of the day, it's clear how this case is going to turn out, which is the government has the right to do this. So we think the litigation is super important, but we're going to lose some. That said, we've had some really good wins in the last couple of weeks, and they're mixed in terms of what they mean. We brought a case involving an element of the Department of Education called the Institute Education Sciences, which is kind of like a think tank inside the department and is really relied on by school districts to figure out how to be better at teaching, be better at running education systems. And the administration's trying to shut it down. That's what our lawsuit's about. And partly what they had done is refuse to share the data they have with school districts around the country. And they've reversed that decision. So now this is definitely a result of the pressure from our litigation. They're now going to sort of continue some of the functions of this agency. We represent commissioners at the Consumer Product Safety Commission, which is an independent agency that deals with what it sounds like, making sure the products we buy, whether it's electric shavers or baby strollers, are safe. It's supposed to be independent. So the commissioners get appointed, and once they're appointed, they're supposed to stay on for their full term without any interference from the president. Trump is of the view there is no such thing as independence. Everybody should have to bow down to him. So he fired the 3 Democratic commissioners on this agency, and we represent them. We've had them reinstated for now, and then just had a ruling at the appellate court level upholding the decision to reinstate them. That case may very well land at the Supreme Court. The issue about whether independent commissioners, supposedly independent commissioners, can be fired just at will by the president is definitely going to the Supreme Court, and we're going to have a tough time there. And it may end up being our case that goes there. We'll see. And then on the third one, we had an outright win where we challenged in the early days of the administration efforts at the Department of Health and Human Services and the Center for Disease Control to strip information from the web that, according to the administration, evidenced so-called gender ideology, which I don't think is a thing. But anything that basically talks about LGBTQ rights, but also examines gender at all, they were stripping down from the web. So the most egregious example that I happen to know is they took down a database of information about heart disease in Florida by county, by gender. Because it had gender in the title, the people inside the agencies said, well, I guess that must be gender ideology, and they took it down. So it turns out this information is super useful and important. Like doctors around the country rely on the information that the Department of Health and Human Services posts to check and what's the latest information about the best ways to do care. So we represent an organization called Doctors with America, which has 27,000 doctor members, saying that this was illegal. We came up with a creative reason why it was illegal, that there's actually a law that deals with how the government manages information. And it's not a great law. It's intended to make it harder for the government to do things, to sort of put obstacles in the way to help corporate America. But as it turned out, we were able to look at this law and say, well, you got to go through process before you take things down. And they didn't. So we just want a ruling in that case. We'd want a preliminary ruling in that case, and now just want a full ruling. So you can see, like, we're having some wins. Some of the cases are little, some of them are really big. Some of them are on the front page, and some of them are just in the trade journals. But I think the litigation is really, really important. It's the most unconstitutional and constitution trampling administration in American history, hands down. So we have to go to court and try to protect our constitutional rights and to uphold the law.
Well, let's close out here by talking a little bit about what our listeners, what ordinary people can do in between elections, if anything, to help throw sand in some of the gears as we head toward this fascist apocalypse.
Well, the goal is to prevent us from getting there. So I think, the lobbying is important. Calling your member of Congress, super important. All those emails, they actually make a difference. I think the litigation we're doing makes a difference. From my point of view, the most important thing is for people to turn out in demonstrations on the streets and show visibly their objection to what's going on. That has all kinds of positive ramifications. It gets news attention. It helps people feel safe and stronger in a sense of solidarity, because what Trump is relying on is that we feel scared and isolated and alone. We're not, but we feel that way. But we don't feel that way if you're in the street with another 100,000 people. It amplifies the other work that we need to do and gives and charges us forward to do that. And if people are frustrated that the Democrats aren't strong enough, which they should be frustrated, getting in the streets and protesting is the best way, because the Democrats are not going to be leaders, and no one should expect that. But they are followers. And if they see that the course forward is to be tough, that people are demanding that they be tough, well, they may not be as tough as you want, but they will be tougher. So I'm a big believer in the power of these demonstrations. The recent No Kings one, which had 5 million people on the street, I think makes a big difference. I wouldn't say, as you said, that we were the leaders, but we were among the groups helping drive that forward. We're also helping drive forward a coalition that's organizing for July 17th, which is the birthday of John Lewis, for Good Trouble Lives On actions. People go to goodtroubleliveson.org to sign up. We've got 1,000 actions already scheduled around the country. It's going to be another big day. This happens to be a Thursday, not a weekend. That's when his birthday falls. So the events won't be quite the scale they were for the No Kings, but it's going to be another big day of action, and really hope people can turn out for that.
Well, thank you very much, Rob Weissman. Keep up the good work, and we'll keep following you. Come back anytime to let us know how it's going.
Great talking to you. Thanks.
We've been speaking with Robert Weissman. We will link to his work at Public Citizen at RalphNaderRadioHour.com. I want to thank our guests again, Ambassador Jon Merryman, Rob Weissman. For those of you listening on the radio, that's our show. For you podcast listeners, stay tuned for some bonus material we call the Wrap-Up, featuring Francesco DeSantis with In Case You Haven't Heard. A transcript of this program will appear on the Ralph Nader Radio Hour Substack site soon after the episode is posted.
The producers of the Ralph Nader Radio Hour are Jimmy Lee Wirt, Hannah Feldman, and Matthew Marin. Our executive producer, Alan Minsky.
Our theme music, Stand Up, Rise Up, was written and performed by Kemp Harris. Our proofreader is Elizabeth Solomon.
Join us next week on the Ralph Nader Radio Hour. Thank you, Ralph.
Thank you, everybody.
Say you're tired of trying. You say we have no choice. Say you're just one person, and who will hear your voice? Don't let them fool you. You have the power in your hand. I'm only trying to school you.